Why had the desert gone so quiet? And why did she suddenly feel like she wasn't supposed to survive the next hour? The first thing Juliana Price tasted was blood. The second was sand, dry, bitter, clinging to her tongue like the desert wanted to claim her before the enemy ever got the chance. She opened her eyes to a world tilted sideways, a Humvee on its flank, smoke drifting upward in thin, wavering strands. She didn't know how long she'd been unconscious. Seconds. Minutes. Long enough for her ears to still ring like someone had set off a grenade inside her skull. She forced herself to breathe, slow, controlled. She learned that in training, when you wake in chaos, don't move until you've listened to the world. Except the world wasn't listening back. It was waiting, watching, a silence that wasn't peace but warning. Movement not hers, engines, multiple, getting closer. Her pulse spiked. Her body forgot pain and remembered instinct. She pushed herself upright, feeling the knife-edge sting of something sharp across her ribs. The vehicle had flipped. She remembered that now. The sudden white streak in the corner of her vision, the explosion, weightlessness. Then darkness. Her hand slid over her chest. Her M4 was still there, somehow intact. Her fingers tightened around it like a lifeline. Why wasn't anyone calling her name? Why hadn't her team come back? Why did the air feel like she was already buried underneath it? She crawled toward the shattered window, boots slipping on broken metal, her radio crushed, her camelback ripped open, water lost to the sand. Her throat tightened, not from fear but calculation. She knew exactly what dehydration did in a desert like this, and she knew exactly how many hours she had before her brain began shutting down. Not many. She kicked out the remaining glass and slid into the burning sunlight, feeling it strike her skin like a slap. The heat was already punishing, but the sound behind her, the rising rumble, the shouting, was worse. They were coming, and they weren't coming to help. She dropped low, instinct pulling her toward the nearest rock formation. Pain flared along her hip as she crawled behind cover, but she ignored it. Pain meant alive. Silence meant danger. Her team should have been there, but protocol was brutal and clear. If you can't save everyone, you save who you can. You don't stop the convoy. You don't risk the rest of the mission. You return when able, if able. But hearing that and living that were different things. She tasted bitterness on her tongue, more than sand, more than blood, something quieter, something lonely. Why me? Why here? Why now? But she shoved that thought aside. Questions weren't survival, decisions were. She scanned the horizon. No friendly vehicles, no dust trails, no sign of extraction, just the desert stretching out forever, beautiful, deadly, indifferent. She pulled in a shaky breath. Adapt, assess, act. The mantra Seals repeated until it lived in bone. No water. Limited ammo. Enemy converging. No communications. No backup. She'd been left behind, not intentionally, but fact didn't ask for feelings, it just existed. She stayed low, stalking along the ridge until she could see the crash site from a distance. A dozen men surrounded the Humvee, weapons raised, shouting in excitement, the kind of excitement that meant capture, not kill. They expected survivors. They expected someone scared, weak, easy prey. Not today, she whispered to herself, voice rasping with dryness. She forced herself to turn away. Escape meant choosing not to fight the battle they wanted. Survival meant patience, not pride. And right now, pride was a death sentence. She started moving east, where she remembered a dried wadi from the mission map. If she could find water, real water, she could last long enough to think, long enough to plan, long enough to stop being prey. But the heat rose quickly. Each step felt heavier. Her body screamed for hydration. Her head throbbed like a second heartbeat behind her eyes. She hadn't realized how much blood she'd lost until the world tilted for a moment. She caught herself on a boulder, breathing through her teeth. Fear tried to climb into her chest, not loud but creeping. What if she didn't make it to the wadi? What if she collapsed before she found water? What if this was the desert's quiet way of burying her? She closed her eyes. For a moment she saw her grandfather, weathered hands, sunburned skin, Arizona sunsets behind him. "You don't beat the desert," he used to say. "You outthink it." So she kept moving. Hours passed. The sun climbed toward hellish heights. Her legs trembled. Her mouth felt like paper. She knew the signs: heat, exhaustion sneaking up fast. If she didn't find water soon, she wouldn't find anything ever again. She dropped to her knees beside the dry stream bed. It looked hopeless, bare sand, cracked and sun-bleached. But she pressed her hand to the ground. It felt cooler, slightly. A whisper of moisture deep underneath. "Come on, come on." She dug with her knife, with her hands. With desperation she refused to admit was desperation. Her breath came shallow, her vision blurred. But then wetness, just a glimmer, then more. Water seeped upward from the sand, muddy and dark. She didn't care. She filtered it through her shemagh, sipped slowly, forcing her body to accept the salvation. The first swallow hurt. The second felt like revival. By the third, she felt something like hope flicker. She filled her torn camelback with what she could purify, buried the rest, hid her tracks. But before she could rest, engines growled in the distance. They were expanding the search. Coming closer. She froze, listening. She wasn't supposed to survive this long. She wasn't supposed to still be breathing. But she was. She pulled herself into the shadow of a ridge and steadied her rifle, the familiarity of its weight grounding her. Her heartbeat slowed, her mind sharpened. If they wanted to hunt her, fine. But they had no idea what kind of woman they'd left alive in this desert. And there was something she hadn't told anyone. Not her team, not her commander, not even the instructors who trained her. She wasn't afraid of dying out here. She was afraid of failing to prove she belonged. Not because of gender. Not because of expectations. But because she'd spent her whole life fighting for the right to stand where she stood. A SEAL. A survivor. A predator in a world that thought she was prey. She wiped the sweat from her brow, leveled her weapon, and whispered into the rising heat. "Come find me." The desert didn't answer. But the enemy would. What made them hesitate? Was it fear? Or the realization that the woman they were hunting refused to die the way they expected? She watched their vehicles crawl across the shimmering horizon, engines straining in the heat. From her vantage point, half hidden behind a jagged outcrop of stone, she counted 6 trucks in a staggered line, men hanging from the sides, rifles ready, eyes sweeping the sands for any sign of movement. They were disciplined today. No shouting, no wandering, no distractions. A different tone than earlier. Someone had told them she was worth finding. She pressed her cheek against the rifle stock, slowing her breath. A part of her wanted to take the shot, just to remind them she wasn't running scared. But instinct held her finger still. Not yet. Not when she was dehydrated, the sun still high, and her hands trembling faintly from exhaustion. She waited for the tremble to pass. It didn't. Her jaw tightened. She hated that. Hated feeling her body betray her when her mind was sharp, clear, calculating. She closed her eyes for a moment, grounding herself. "You're not dying here. You're not done." But a quieter voice whispered something else. An old voice, one she rarely let surface during missions. "What if no one comes?" Her throat tightened. She forced the thought down. She'd seen operators break not from wounds or fear, but from doubt. The subtle rot that ate you from the inside, hollowing out your will until even survival seemed optional. She wasn't letting that happen. She shifted her position slowly, dragging her pack behind her, every movement deliberate. She needed higher ground and shadows. She needed time, and she needed her mind to stay hers. The vehicles rolled on, unaware of the woman lying motionless in the rocks, studying them like prey that didn't yet know it had been hunted. When they finally passed, she exhaled shakily and allowed herself one fragile moment of honesty. She was terrified, not of dying, not even of capture, but of proving the people who doubted her right. The ones who asked if she was strong enough, tough enough, cold enough when the moment demanded it. The ones who called her a political selection behind her back. She could still hear their voices sometimes in the desert wind. She stood slowly, ignoring the dull ache spreading across her ribs, and began moving again. North now, toward a ridge line that could give her visibility for miles. Her boots dragged more than stepped. Her head pounded. She needed to rest, but rest was luxury. Survival wasn't. By early afternoon, the heat became something alive, pressing against her, pushing, weighing down her limbs. She stumbled once, caught herself on a boulder, breath coming harsh and uneven. Her mind floated for a moment, drifting somewhere between memory and hallucination. She saw her brother teaching her how to shoot cans off a fence in the Arizona sun, heard her grandfather telling her how to find water by reading the earth, felt the burn of the obstacle course during Bud S., instructors shouting in her ear as she clawed her way through mud and salt water. Pain is temporary, quitting is forever. The mantra snapped her back. She reached the ridgeline just as the sun dipped low enough to cast long shadows across the desert. She sank onto her stomach, raising her rifle again. The desert below stretched in waves of gold and rust, and in the distance, she saw movement. One vehicle, separated from the others. Alone. She felt a spark of clarity, a moment of cold, calculated opportunity. She could use it. Her breathing steadied, her heartbeat slowed, her hands stopped shaking, not from strength but from focus. She rolled her shoulder, embedded her elbows into the sand for stability, and began studying the pattern of the men around the truck. 4 of them tired, lax, one leaning against the hood, helmet off, another sitting in the shade with his rifle across his lap, 2 standing half alert, arguing about something. They'd been searching all day. They were exhausted. And exhaustion made mistakes. She tracked each of them for nearly half an hour, the sun sinking lower, the light softening from harsh blue to amber. She didn't rush, didn't let adrenaline cloud judgment. She was a SEAL, not a desperate survivor firing blind into the desert. But as she waited, something inside her shifted, a strange, unwelcome emotion she rarely allowed room for. Guilt. 4 men unaware, unprepared. She wasn't cold-blooded. Killing wasn't victory. It wasn't glory. It was necessity. She'd always believed that. But there was a small part of her, a human part, that wished she hadn't been put in a position where the only way forward was over their bodies. She swallowed hard. That part of her wasn't wrong, but it wasn't running this mission. She aligned the scope. The crosshair settled on the first target. Inhale. Exhale. Respiratory pause. 1 shot. The man fell before his body knew he'd been hit. 2nd shot. The soldier by the turret collapsed backward as if someone had cut a string. 2 more, clean, efficient, humane in the strange, broken way combat makes that word mean something else. 3 seconds, 4 lives, and an opportunity. She waited a long moment, scanning for movement. None. No response from the patrols far behind them. Good. She descended the ridge fast but cautious, the world narrowing to a tunnel of survival instinct and tactical awareness. Her boots slid on loose gravel. Her body ached, but she moved with purpose. The truck was a jackpot. Water, ammunition, rations, a map, and most important, a radio. Her fingers hovered over it for a moment, a tremor of hope fluttering in her chest. She shut her eyes, steadying herself. Don't get emotional. Not now, not yet. She tested the dial. Most channels were encrypted. One wasn't. She lifted the mic halfway, then stopped. Calling now meant announcing her position to everyone, including the enemy units that might be scanning. She exhaled, set the radio down gently, and rested her forehead against the steering wheel. She was exhausted, more than she wanted to admit. Her throat burned. Her skin felt too tight. Her ribs pulsed. And for the first time since the crash, fatigue pressed hard enough to feel like hands on her shoulders. She needed rest, even an hour, but lying down meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant. The crack of a distant rifle shot snapped her upright. Not aimed at her, not close, but it was enough. Enough to remind her that rest didn't belong to her yet. She gripped the wheel, wiped the sweat from her eyes, and whispered to herself, not bravado, not courage, but quiet determination. You belong here, prove it. The desert wind moved softly through the truck's canvas tarp, as if agreeing. She started the engine, mind sharpening again. She wasn't hunted anymore. Not if she could help it. Not if she took control of the battlefield. Not if she became the ghost they whispered about in fear. Because she wasn't done. She was just getting started. What was that feeling tightening in her chest? Fear, or the slow, rising clarity of someone becoming exactly what the enemy should have feared from the beginning? Night fell like a blessing she hadn't earned yet. The desert cooled, the sky turning into a canvas of stars so sharp they looked like they could cut. She could breathe again, not fully, not comfortably, but without feeling like her lungs were wrapped in fire. Darkness made most people blind. But for Juliana Price, it made her sharper. She parked the captured truck in a narrow ravine, concealed beneath the rock overhang, engine ticking quietly as it cooled. Her hands moved mechanically, checking the vehicle, checking her magazines, checking the stolen radio for any traffic she could decode. Every movement felt slow but deliberate, like she'd slipped into a different version of herself. A quieter one. A colder one. A necessary one. As she worked, she caught her reflection in the dusty side mirror. Dirt streaked across her face, sand embedded in her hair, a thin cut across her cheek, and in her eyes something she didn't recognize at first. And then she did. Resolve. Not confidence. Not bravado. Resolve. She almost didn't like it. It looked too much like acceptance, accepting that she'd become a lone operator behind enemy lines with no guarantee of rescue. Accepting that she might have to fight until her body simply had nothing left to give. But when she turned away from the mirror, something steadier replaced the discomfort. Purpose. She drank a cautious amount of water from a found canteen, just enough to bring life back to her muscles. Then she sat still, listening to the radio chatter. She couldn't understand most of the language, but tone she understood like instinct. Urgency. Frustration. Fear creeping in at the edges. They were talking about her. About the shadow that had attacked the patrol. About the ghost moving through the rocks. About the American they still couldn't find. Someone higher ranking was angry. She could hear it in the clipped way he spoke. She imagined the scene, soldiers sweating under interrogation, nervously pointing at maps, trying to explain how one woman had slipped through their perimeter again and again. A strange, dark satisfaction pulsed in her chest. But right behind it, loneliness. She let herself feel it for a moment, because ignoring it made it stronger. Loneliness wasn't weakness. It was the simple truth of being human in a place that didn't care if you disappeared. She rested her head back against the cold rock wall behind her, eyes closed. 3 days alone. 3 days without certainty. 3 days proving to herself she wasn't the person some people quietly assumed she was. A quota. A symbol. A gesture. She hated those words more than she hated dehydration. She forced her eyes open. She wasn't done. She couldn't be done. Not when she could hear engines in the distance again, slowly forming new search lines. Not when the world outside this ravine was still moving toward her. She gripped her rifle and stood. She needed to move before dawn, use the night to reposition, strike again not to kill, but to disrupt, to confuse, to turn their search into chaos so they couldn't form a meaningful perimeter around her. She wasn't fighting to win. She was fighting to survive long enough to be found. The moonlight painted the desert silver as she ascended the ridge above the ravine. The sand felt cool beneath her boots. The breeze brushed across her skin with something almost like mercy. She crouched at the crest and scanned the dark plains. Headlights, zigzags, spreading, searching. She steadied her breathing. She wasn't going to attack directly this time. She was going to make them afraid of shadows, not bullets. She moved silently along the ridge until she found a natural funnel, 2 stone pillars narrowing into a bottleneck where vehicles would have to slow. She planted 2 of the enemy's own grenades beneath a thin layer of sand and set up a lure, fresh tracks leading right toward the trap. Not elegant but effective. 2 hours later, she watched from nearly a mile away as the first vehicle crept toward it. Her pulse held, her breath still. She stayed low in the sand, face half buried, rifle ready just in case. The truck rolled forward, slowed. Its headlights washed across the ground. Then, a hollow whump shook the earth. The explosion lifted the truck's front wheels clear off the ground before slamming it down crooked. Men tumbled out in panic, shouting over one another, firing blindly into the dark. Juliana didn't fire back. She slipped away in the opposite direction, a silent ghost in the dunes. Let them fight shadows. Let them shoot fear. Let them waste their energy on phantoms. She climbed another rise, heart pounding from exertion, not fear. Her ribs burned. Her legs trembled. Her lungs felt raw, but she kept going until she reached a vantage point overlooking the entire field of chaos she'd created. Men running, lights swinging wildly, engines revving, confusion spreading like wildfire. She whispered under her breath, almost in awe. This is what a single operator can do. But saying it brought something sharp to the surface, an ache that wasn't physical. She didn't want to be legendary. She didn't want to be feared. She didn't want to be alone in this desert earning survival, 1 inch at a time. She just wanted to go home. She sat down in the sand, chest heaving, fighting the sting behind her eyes. A part of her, one she didn't like to acknowledge, wanted to hear her team's voices, wanted someone to say they were coming for her, wanted the reassurance she'd given others 100 times. Just hold on. We're inbound. We've got you. But there was only wind. Only sand. Only the desert breathing around her like something ancient and uncaring. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Not tears, sweat, exhaustion. She refused to name it anything else. She checked her watch. Hours until dawn. Hours until the enemy regrouped. Hours she needed to survive. She tightened her grip on her rifle and whispered to the night sky, not in prayer but in promise. I'm still here, I'm not done. The stars above her didn't respond. But she didn't need them to. Because as she pushed herself back onto her feet, forcing her legs to obey her, she felt something unexpected settle inside her. Not hope. Not strength. Something simpler, something steadier. The decision to live. No matter what it took. What made her stop moving? Instinct, or the strange sense that the desert was about to change the rules on her? She felt it before she heard it, a vibration in the sand, a pulse beneath her boots, faint but unmistakable. She froze, breath caught halfway in her throat. The desert was usually predictable: wind, silence, shifting heat. But this was different, mechanical, heavy, coordinated. Reinforcements. Not the sloppy, exhausted search teams from before. Something bigger, something organized. She crouched low behind a ridge, letting the rising wind sweep the sand over her tracks. Her heart hammered, not from fear but calculation. She spent the night moving, placing traps, drawing them away from her position. It had worked for hours. But the enemy had adapted. She could feel it. She pressed her ear to the ground. The vibrations were getting stronger, closer. A steady rhythm, not frantic like the trucks earlier. This was controlled, professional. A chill crept across her spine. These weren't militia. These were hunters. She backed away from the ridge slowly, careful not to silhouette herself against the horizon. For a moment, her vision swam, fatigue trying to claw its way into her decisions. She blinked hard, grounding herself. Not now. Stay sharp. Stay alive. She slipped into a narrow crack between two towering slabs of rock, just wide enough for her to move through sideways. The kind of place no vehicle could reach, and few people would think to search. Her ribs ached with each breath. Every step felt heavier than the last. But the fear, the exhaustion, those were background noise. What mattered was strategy. She needed to know what was coming. She climbed the rocks silently, fingers digging into hot stone, body protesting every motion. At the top, she lay flat and let her eyes adjust. And there they were. 5 armored vehicles, not technicals, not pickup trucks. Military transports. Black-clad soldiers riding on the sides, scopes glinting under the early morning light. Their movements were crisp, tight, efficient. No shouting, no confusion. Their eyes scanned the horizon the way her team would have, methodical, disciplined, lethal. Her stomach sank. She wasn't dealing with a search party anymore. She was dealing with their version of special operations. Her breath caught. Not fear. Recognition. Only professionals move like that. She slowly exhaled through her teeth. A new game had begun, and she was no longer the one creating the rules, they were. She slid back down the rock face and crouched in the shadows, gripping her rifle so hard her knuckles whitened beneath the dust. She needed distance, a new angle, a new plan. Staying close to them meant death. Running blindly meant capture. She had to think like she always did, differently from everyone else. Her pulse steadied. She began to move. Not away from them, but lateral, changing elevation, using shadows while the sun was still low, because she knew something they didn't. She didn't have to outrun them. She just had to outthink them. As she crossed a narrow ledge, the sky began to brighten, dawn spreading across the desert in bands of orange and gold. She paused for a moment, letting the colors settle into her bones. Beautiful. Deadly. The world didn't care she was alone. She pushed forward. Minutes turned into an hour. Her muscles screamed. Her mind drifted between razor focus and foggy exhaustion. She could feel her limits creeping closer, step by step, breath by breath. She reached a rocky basin and dropped behind cover. From here, she could see the enemy force fanning out. They were tracking something. She couldn't tell what. Her footprints were mostly hidden. So what? Her stomach twisted. Heat signatures. They had thermal. Her heart thudded hard against her ribs. She closed her eyes, breathing through panic that threatened to break free from the steel edges she'd kept it behind. Thermal changed everything. She opened her eyes slowly. No. No, don't spiral. Figure it out. Thermal was limited by terrain, by stone, by shadow. She scanned the basin. The rocks here were thick, towering, jagged, enough to break sightlines, enough to confuse sensors. She crawled into a narrow cave halfway up the rock wall, only a few feet deep, but tight enough to hide her heat signature, once she pressed against the cool stone. She lay still, rifle across her chest, heartbeat loud in her ears. Engines drew closer. Voices. Boots hitting sand. A command barked quietly. Steps spreading in a pattern that sent a chill through her. It was a flanking formation. She could picture it perfectly, because she'd used it herself. Her fingers tightened on her rifle. She wasn't afraid of dying, but she was afraid of failing the one thing she'd fought so hard for, respect earned through grit, not assigned by sympathy. Her lungs held still. Footsteps approached her hiding place. Slow, measured. Someone was checking the rock wall. She pressed her cheek hard against the stone to cool her skin temperature. She willed her breath to become invisible. The footsteps stopped just outside the cave. Silence. A long silence. She imagined the soldier standing there, looking at the cave, wondering, evaluating, deciding. Her pulse thumped once, twice, 3 times. He shifted. A radio crackled softly, too soft to fully understand, but the tone was clipped. He moved on. She let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her body trembled. Not from fear, she knew fear. This was something stranger, something sharp and fragile that lived between relief and realization. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was being tested, pushed to an edge she didn't know she had. She closed her eyes and whispered the only truth she had left. "You're not breaking, not here." Her voice was barely sound. Just breath. Just will. As the soldiers moved past her, spreading farther into the desert, she knew something with sudden, painful clarity. She couldn't hide forever. She couldn't run forever. She needed to change the game again, turn hunted into hunter, chaos into strategy, survival into control. Because if she stayed reactive, she would die. But if she struck first, she might just live long enough for the sky to bring her a miracle. She wiped her face, steadying her breath. The desert wasn't done testing her, but she wasn't done answering. What made her pause at the edge of the ridge? Intuition, or the quiet knowledge that what she was about to do would decide whether she lived through sunrise. She flattened herself against the rock face, watching the Special Operations Unit sweep the valley below with a precision that made her jaw clench. These men didn't waste movement. They didn't shout. They didn't panic. They worked like one organism, like a machine with many bodies and one mind. She'd been hunted before, but not like this. Not by people who moved the way her own team moved. She counted 8 of them on foot, 2 more near the vehicles. Their spacing was deliberate, 20 meters apart, overlapping fields of fire. If she assassinated one, the others would collapse toward the sound within seconds. If she made noise, they would triangulate. If she ran, they would pursue in coordinated patterns, cutting her off from terrain advantages. This wasn't a chase. This was a slow tightening of a noose. She closed her eyes and let a strange stillness settle in her chest. So this is how it ends. Or how it changes. A breeze swept through the rocks, lifting a thin trail of dust across her cheek. She tasted the grit on her lips and something else beneath it, resolve, sharp and metallic. She slid back from the ridge and crouched beside her pack, hands working fast. Inventory. 2 magazines. 2 grenades. A half-full Camelback. Her knife. Her radio. Her mind. She breathed once, steadying. A SEAL didn't fight numbers. A SEAL fought terrain. Strategy. Angles. Timing. She knew what she had to do. Not escape. Not hide. Distract. If she could draw the hunters away from a single point, stretch their formation, force them to split for even a moment, that opening could buy her miles of space. Miles meant survival. She slipped down from her vantage point like a shadow peeling off the rock. Every step had purpose, small, controlled, careful not to send pebbles skittering. Her ribs stabbed with each inhalation, but she embraced the pain as confirmation she was still alive. She moved to a cluster of boulders half a kilometer away, a natural amphitheater. Sound would bounce here, echo, confuse. Perfect. She pulled out one of the grenades and set it behind a rock, pin looped delicately with a strip of torn cloth. Then she tied the cloth to a dead branch wedged into the crevice. The slightest pull, the slightest shift. The trap was set. She moved again, fast now, putting distance between herself and the coming explosion. Sand spilled beneath her boots. Sweat slipped down her spine. She didn't look back. The sun crept up slowly, drawing long shadows across the sand. Dawn lit the world in golds and reds, painting the desert like it wanted to apologize for trying to kill her. She reached another ridge just as the trap triggered. The explosion cracked the air, sharp and violent. Dust erupted into a plume. Echoes bounced between the rocks in overlapping waves. Immediately, the hunters stopped. Instant freeze. Then, movement. Coordinated. Rapid. They converged toward the blast site. All except one. A soldier on the far flank turned in the opposite direction, toward her. Maybe he'd heard something she didn't. Maybe he was simply smarter than the others. Either way, he was coming. Her breath hitched. She ducked behind a boulder. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from exhaustion finally crawling its way up her spine like a warning. She clenched her jaw, forcing her limbs still. Not now. Not yet. Not here. Footsteps approached. Soft, controlled, he was good, very good. She slid her rifle into position, cheek settling against the stock. But she didn't fire. Killing him would bring the others. She needed silence more than blood. He came within 10 meters. She could hear him breathing. 5 meters. Her pulse pounded in her throat. 3 meters. He turned his head slightly, scanning the rocks. His back was to her now, a rare gift. She struck. She moved fast, silent, one fluid motion. Her arm wrapped around his neck, her knife pressed under his jaw. He tried to twist, tried to grab her arm, but she was already driving him down into the sand. He thrashed, desperate, but she held firm. Her voice was a whisper against his ear. SHH. Then he went still. She dragged him behind a rock, chest heaving, vision swimming, not from guilt, but from the strain of fighting with a body that was dangerously close to shutting down. Her hands shook violently now. She stared at them, furious, frustrated, afraid to admit the truth. Her body was failing. She was overheating. Dehydrated. Running on fumes. And the hunters would regroup any minute. Her throat closed for a moment, panic attempting to breach the wall she'd built around her emotions. She forced herself to breathe through it, slow, controlled, the way she'd practiced in drown-proofing training. Don't lose yourself. Don't lose the mission. Don't lose the fight. She grabbed her stolen radio and scanned frequencies again. Static, more static, then. Voices. American voices. Last known intercept, grid 79, repeat 79. No heat signature, moving east-west patterns. Continue sweep, she's out there. Her breath punched out of her chest. Her team. They were looking for her. She raised the mic, thumb trembling above the transmit button. This was the moment. 3 days alone. 3 days fighting. 3 days surviving. Her throat burned, the words wouldn't come. What if speaking gave away her position to both sides? What if they weren't close enough? What if the hunters were listening too? Her thumb hovered. She swallowed hard. Come on, Juliana, don't be afraid now, she whispered to herself, voice cracking. She lifted the mic. Her finger pressed down. Falcon, this is Price. Her voice broke, dry, weak, damaged. Alive, requesting evac, heavy pursuit. Static answered. She closed her eyes. Then, Bryce. Say again, say again. We've got you. Her vision blurred. Not tears. Relief. Exhaustion. Something too big to name. She opened her mouth to respond, but a sound cut through the air, a sharp whistle slicing down from above. A drone. Enemy surveillance. Her blood ran cold. They'd heard her transmission. She bolted behind cover, adrenaline surging so violently she nearly stumbled. The drone circled overhead, scanning, searching. And then, below her, she heard engines roar back to life. The hunters had pinpointed her location. She gripped her rifle, chest heaving, heart pounding hard enough to shake her ribs. This was it. The moment everything balanced on a razor's edge. She whispered to herself, not to be brave but to stay human. "You're not done, not yet." And the desert, quiet and merciless, waited for her next move. What made her run? Instinct, or the terrifying certainty that every second she hesitated brought death a little closer. The drone circled again, its faint electric hum threading through the air like a warning she couldn't outrun. Juliana pressed her back to the stone, lungs burning, heart hammering so hard she felt it in her teeth. Her transmission, the enemy must have caught it, or triangulated it, or simply got lucky. Luck. She hated that word. She didn't want luck, she wanted control. But control was slipping, grain by grain, like sand through her fingers. She pushed off the rock and sprinted across the uneven terrain, each footfall sending shockwaves through her battered ribs. Her body wasn't responding like before. Her legs were slower. Her breaths ragged. The edges of her vision pulsed with dark spots. She forced herself forward anyway. Running wasn't panic, it was strategy. If she didn't create distance now, nothing her team did would matter. Behind her, engines roared louder. They were coming. She slid down a slope of loose gravel, catching herself on her palms as rocks tore into her skin. She bit back a grunt. Pain was useful, it kept her awake, present, alive. She couldn't afford numbness. Not yet. She darted into a narrow cut in the terrain, a small canyon where the walls rose sharply enough to break line of sight and mask her heat signature. She crouched low, pressing her cheek to the cool rock to bleed off heat. Her breath rattled in her chest. She could hear them now. Footsteps above. Boots sliding. Voices in clipped commands. They were very close. She forced her breathing shallow, quiet, invisible. A soldier stepped to the edge of the canyon overhead. She could see his silhouette against the morning light, weapon raised, scanning slowly. He paused. Her fingers tightened around her rifle. Just one shot. One shot, and she could break their formation. But that shot would bring 10 more. He shifted, leaning forward. Her muscles tensed. He stepped back. Her entire body trembled with the effort not to collapse. She waited, long enough for minutes to feel like hours, long enough for silence to feel heavy. Only when the engines faded slightly did she crawl deeper into the canyon. She slid her pack off just long enough to wipe sweat from her eyes with a gritty palm. Her throat burned, her head throbbed, a metallic taste filled her mouth. She knew what this was. Heat stress. Vast. Dangerous. Unforgiving. She lifted her camel back, sucking down a small amount of water even though she wanted to drain the entire thing. She had to ration it. She didn't know how long until rescue. Didn't know if rescue could even reach her. She closed her eyes. Her grandfather's voice floated up from memory. "The desert doesn't care if you're strong, kid. It cares if you respect it." She opened her eyes again. Then respect it. But survive it. A distant rumble reached her, the low thunder of helicopters. She stiffened, heart lurching into her throat. She scrambled to climb a small ledge and peek over the ridge. Yes. Yes. 2 distant specks moving low and fast, kicking up sand in trailing spirals behind them. Blackhawks. American. Her breath hitched with something painfully close to hope. But the enemy heard them too. Engines roared back to life. The hunters converged like a tightening storm, vehicles veering toward the line of approach, cutting across the desert in coordinated arcs. They weren't going to let those helicopters reach her easily. She dropped back into the canyon, scrambling for her radio. Falcon to any station. Visual on friendlies, enemy moving to intercept. Repeat, moving to intercept. Static. Then. Falcon, this is Reaper 5-1. Copy your signal, hold position, mark when able. Her chest tightened with raw relief. But she couldn't answer yet, not while the drone buzzed overhead again. She pressed herself into the shadows, eyes tracking its movement. It circled again, and then again. Then the tone changed, the hum deepened, narrowed, searching pattern. It had found a heat signature. Not hers. The canyon wall still radiated warmth from the rising sun. The drone drifted slightly left, confused. She saw her chance. She sprinted. Her feet hammered against the sand, lungs screaming, legs threatening to buckle. She didn't care. Pain didn't matter. Her ribs didn't matter. The blood soaking into her shirt didn't matter. All that mattered were those helicopters. Those voices calling her name. Those people who refused to leave her behind. She reached the crest of the canyon, and a wave of dizziness nearly knocked her sideways. She caught herself on her rifle, blinking hard. Not now, she growled through clenched teeth. Not now. The sky thumped louder now, rotors cutting the air, engines roaring. She scrambled onto open ground, scanning for the best extraction point. A small rise. High visibility. Cover for incoming birds. Exposed to enemy fire. Risky, but necessary. She pulled a smoke grenade from her vest, one of the few she'd taken from the captured truck. Her thumb slipped on the pin once, twice. Sweat made her grip slick. She wiped her hand and pulled again, clean release. She threw it hard across the sand. Orange smoke bloomed, bright and unmistakable. The helicopters banked toward her. So did the enemy. Dust plumes erupted across the desert as 6 trucks accelerated at full speed, cutting across dunes, rifles already firing. She dropped to a knee and steadied her weapon. Her vision blurred, she blinked it clear. She wasn't firing to kill. She was firing to survive. She squeezed the trigger, controlled bursts. She saw a windshield crack, a driver slump, a gunner fall from the turret. But she already felt her magazine lightening in her hand. 20 rounds left. Her arms shook with effort. She forced them steady. 10 rounds. Her breaths were rasps now. Each one scraped her throat raw, her fingers numbed. Her shoulders ached like someone was carving into them. The enemy closed in. 50 meters. 40. 30. The first Blackhawk swooped in low, its downdraft slamming into her, sand whipping at her face. The door gunner unleashed a storm of fire, bullets chewing into the ground around the approaching trucks. Still they came. She fired again. 8 rounds. 6. 4. The Blackhawk touched down. Go, Geo. She pushed herself upright and her legs almost buckled. The world spun. Her lungs screamed. The edges of her vision darkened. She stumbled forward. A bullet tore past her shoulder, hot air slicing her skin. 3 rounds left. She fired once, driver down, twice, gunner ducked, third. Click. Empty. The enemy was almost on top of her. She sprinted the last 10 meters toward the helicopter, not even feeling her feet hit the ground. Her breath was a wheeze. Her ribs felt like glass. Her head felt light, detached, floating. Hands grabbed her, pulling her inside. The Blackhawk lifted instantly. The world dropped away beneath her. She collapsed onto the floor, chest heaving, vision flashing white. Voices blurred around her. Got her. She's hit. No, she's dehydrated. Get water. Hell of a fight, holy hell. Stay with us, Price, stay with us. She heard none of it clearly. She stared up at the vibrating ceiling of the helicopter, sand falling from her hair like dust from a broken statue. Her eyes stung, but not from exhaustion, from something quieter, something deeper. She made it. She wasn't alone anymore. And as the helicopter banked west toward safety, she let her eyes drift closed, not in surrender but finally in relief. What was that sound in her chest? Relief, or the fragile, trembling fear that everything she'd held together for 3 days might finally break loose? She lay on the Black Hawk's cold metal floor, the thrum of rotors pounding through her bones like a second heartbeat. Her vision flickered in and out, sharp one moment, blurred the next. She felt hands on her shoulders, a medic shouting something she couldn't fully process, a canteen pressed against her lips. Slow sip, don't chug slow, Price, easy. Water touched her tongue. She flinched. It hurt at first, the shock of moisture hitting a throat that had been dry for too many hours. But she drank anyway, small sips, the way survival training had drilled into her. Her chest rose and fell in quick, uneven waves. Her arms trembled without permission. Her fingers curled like they were still holding a rifle. She wasn't shaking from fear. She was shaking from everything she'd forced her body to do without rest. Someone leaned over her, Webb. His face was streaked with sand and sweat, eyes sharp but shining with something that looked like disbelief. 3 damn days, he whispered, voice rough. Price, we thought you were gone. She tried to speak, but her throat seized. The medic lifted her gently, letting her sit against the wall of the helicopter. Her vision steadied just enough to see Webb's expression. Not pity. Not shock. Respect. Real respect. Her hand twitched toward him, reflex instinct, and he grabbed it, squeezing once firm. You did everything right, he said, leaning close so she could hear him over the engine roar. Everything. You stayed alive, you stayed smart, you stayed you. A breath hitched in her throat, fragile, betraying, painful. She looked away, toward the open door where desert wind streamed past. The sand below stretched in wide, endless waves, the same sand that tried to swallow her, hide her, bury her. From up here it looked peaceful. It was strange. How the place that tried to kill her now looked quiet, beautiful, almost kind. The medic wrapped a thermal blanket around her shoulders. She felt ridiculous. SEALs weren't supposed to look fragile, but she didn't have the strength to argue, not with the adrenaline drop shaking her bones. She felt Webb watching her. Price, he said softly, you did more than survive. Her gaze slid toward him. He swallowed. You hurt them, you outsmarted them, you made them afraid. A breath she didn't expect escaped her, half a laugh, half a sob. She pressed a hand against her eyes, not ready to let them see what 3 days of silence had done to her. Webb didn't push. He just sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder, his presence steady like a wall. The helicopter banked right and she winced as her ribs protested. The medic lifted her shirt carefully, not invasive, just assessing. Bruises bloomed across her skin in violent shades of blue and purple. A few cuts still bled. Her lips were cracked, her knuckles raw, her arms scraped. She looked like someone who'd been through hell and clawed her way out with her bare hands. Ribs might be cracked, the medic muttered. Severe dehydration, muscle breakdown, but she's stable. Juliana exhaled shakily, her eyes drifting to the open sky. Stable. Funny word. She didn't feel stable. She felt human. More human than she'd felt in years. Her radio crackled suddenly, Chen's voice coming through the intercom. Price, this is Commander Chen. You hearing me? Juliana swallowed and lifted the headset with a trembling hand. Yeah, I hear you. Her voice didn't sound like her. It was thin, strained, but alive. Chen's response hit like a punch of emotion. "Damn good to hear your voice, Chief." "Chief." The title echoed inside her. She'd earned it, not just in training, not just in missions. But here alone, abandoned, hunted. And she'd come out alive. Juliana closed her eyes. Her heart hurt in a way she couldn't name. Not pain, not fear, something softer, something heavy. Belonging. The word slid into her mind uninvited, unexpected. Belonging. For the first time since earning her trident, she felt it. Not because she survived, but because her team came for her. Because they didn't stop looking. Because someone had believed she would still be fighting. The medic touched her shoulder. "Stay awake, Price, don't drift." She nodded once. But her mind drifted anyway. Not to fear, not to danger, but to the strange, quiet truth settling beneath the exhaustion. She had been ready to die out there. Not because she wanted to, but because she refused to break. Yet now that she was safe, the thought of how close she'd come hit her like a delayed impact. Tears she didn't approve of stung her eyes. She blinked them back. But Webb saw. "Hey," he said quietly, "no shame in surviving." She almost laughed from how wrong that sentence sounded. But she didn't. She just let out a slow breath that trembled at the end. The helicopter began to descend toward the forward operating base, lights dotting the desert, figures running to the landing zone, the thrum of engines calming as the mission finally ended. For a moment, she let her eyes slip closed, just for a heartbeat, feeling the wind brush her bruised skin, feeling the last 3 days leave her body molecule by molecule. She wasn't healed. She wasn't whole. But she wasn't alone anymore. The bird touched down. Boots thudded across metal. Voices rose in a chorus she could barely process. "Move back, give her room. She's dehydrated, watch her ribs. We've got her, we've got her. Price, can you stand?" She tried. Her legs buckled. But Webb caught her, arms firm around her shoulders. She felt herself leaning into him, uncontrolled but necessary. "You're all right," he murmured. "We've got you." She swallowed hard, the emotion too big to hide anymore. She whispered into the doorway of the helicopter, the desert wind trailing her last word into the air as her boots touched the ground. "I didn't think you'd come." Webb squeezed her shoulder, a rare softness breaking through his hardened voice. "We always come," he said, "even if it takes 3 damn days." And for the first time since she woke up alone in that burning wreckage, Juliana Price let herself believe it. What was that silence in the back of her mind? Peace? Or the quiet question she'd been avoiding since the moment the ambush flipped her world upside down? They escorted her to the medical tent with a kind of reverence she didn't understand. She felt hands on her arms steadying her, voices calling instructions, a medic shining a light into her eyes, another checking her pulse, her temperature, the tremor still shaking her fingers. But through it all, Juliana Price kept looking past them, toward the open flap of the tent, where the desert wind pushed gently against the canvas like it was reminding her it hadn't gone anywhere. Part of her expected to wake up back in the sand, alone again. Her senses were still calibrated to threat. She heard every footstep, every voice, every metal clang outside. Her mind mapped escape routes automatically, as if expecting the next attack. "You're safe," the medic said softly, noticing the tension in her shoulders. Juliana didn't respond, not because she didn't hear him, but because she didn't know how to feel safe yet. Her body had survived the desert, but her brain was still in it. He handed her a cup of electrolyte solution. "Slow sips." She obeyed, even though sipping made her ribs burn. Her hands shook so badly that the medic steadied the cup for her. Across the tent, the flap opened. Commander Chen stepped in. For a moment, neither spoke. The commander just looked at her, really looked at her, as if she needed to memorize the image of the woman she'd almost lost. Then she exhaled a breath that seemed to shake something out of her. "You scared the hell out of us, Price." Juliana swallowed. Her throat felt raw. "I scared myself." Chen's stern face softened barely, but enough to matter. "Debrief when you're ready," she said gently. "Not before." A strange relief washed over Juliana. She'd expected interrogation, pressure, analysis. Instead, she was given space, respect, belonging again. As Chen stepped out, Webb pushed his way in behind her, carrying a folded American flag someone had grabbed in the excitement. He tossed it onto Juliana's lap with a crooked grin. "For the record," he said, "you made our entire intel shop look stupid. Nobody predicted you'd last this long." Juliana rolled her eyes weakly. "Good to know I'm an inconvenience." He laughed a real laugh, relieved and rough. "You're not an inconvenience, you're a seal." She absorbed the words slowly, like they were water in a place that didn't have enough of it. After the medical checks, they gave her a cot, a blanket, a chance to rest. But she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the hum of the drone, the roar of engines, the crack of gunfire. She felt the sand pulling at her boots, the heat clawing at her skin, the silence pressing against her ribs like a weight. Her mind replayed the moments she almost didn't make it, the decisions that felt too close, the breaths that hurt, the fear she never admitted. She wasn't ashamed of it now. Fear wasn't weakness. Fear was information. And she'd survived because she listened. Hours passed. She lay awake, staring at the tent ceiling until dawn light crept along the canvas walls. Then, a knock on the support pole. "Chief Price." She sat up slowly. Captain Rodriguez, the base commander, stepped inside. His uniform immaculate, his posture centered, his expression unreadable. He pulled a chair close, sat, studied her with a calm she didn't fully trust yet. "Do you understand what you did out there?" Juliana cleared her throat carefully. "I survived." "No," he said quietly, "you did more than that." He leaned forward. "You tied up over 50 enemy soldiers. You forced them to reroute an entire operation. You executed textbook evasion tactics most operators can't replicate under stress. You created chaos with minimal ammunition. You lived through conditions that break people in hours, not days." She swallowed hard. The praise didn't feel comfortable. It felt unreal. Rodriguez continued. "And you did it without backup, without water, without comms, without support, alone." She didn't know what to say. She didn't feel like a legend. She felt like someone who barely held herself together. But the captain wasn't finished. "What you proved," he said, his tone steady and undeniable, "is that capability isn't defined by gender, or assumptions, or rules. You proved that a SEAL is a SEAL." Her chest tightened. Something hot stung her eyes. She blinked it back. "You'll write a report," he added, standing. "Not for paperwork, for training. Your decisions will become doctrine. Your survival will become instruction. Others will learn because you lived." He paused at the flap. "And Juliana, what you did will outlive you." The words felt heavy, too heavy. But true. When he left, she sat for a long time, blanket pooled around her waist, hands resting limp in her lap. She let herself feel everything she'd pushed down. The fear, the anger, the loneliness, the pride, the exhaustion, the quiet miracle of still being alive. Her breath shook once, just once. Then she steadied. Later, when she finally stepped outside, the desert wind brushed against her skin. Not harsh, not hostile, just warm, familiar. She looked at the horizon where she had fought, where she had bled, where she had nearly died, and where she found the part of herself she didn't know she had. Not invincibility. Not bravado. Not legend. Resilience. Silent. Stubborn. Unyielding. Webb appeared beside her, hands in his pockets. "You ready to go home?" She nodded, but before she turned away, she whispered something, barely loud enough for the wind to carry it. Sometimes survival isn't loud. Webb looked over. "What?" Juliana gave a faint, tired smile. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak." She glanced at the horizon one last time. "It simply acts." And with that, she took her first step away from the desert. Not as someone who had been abandoned. Not as someone who had been hunted. But as someone who survived because she refused to be anything else.